Hello there, welcome to my channel. Happy 2020, new year, new microphone. Today we will be talking about my top 5 Latin American goth albums of 2019. There was actually quite a few goth album releases this year, all over the world, and from Latin America specifically. So these 5 are just the ones I personally enjoyed the most. I'm not saying that the other ones that came out were bad or that I didn't like them. These are just the ones I happen to like the most according to my own personal tastes. So keep that in mind. Look up other ones. And also, this is not in any specific order, because you can tell me to pick a top 5 of anything and okay, these are 5 that I like the most, but which I like the best, which I like second best, which I like the 5th best out of the 5. It changes depending on my mood. This is just a random order, but these are the 5 that I like the most. And once again, we will not be including music clips because apparently the copyright gods on YouTube don't like any amount of music, even if it's less than 30 seconds, because YouTube is international and the 30-second law seems to be a US specific thing. Anyways, without further ado, here are the albums. The first is Jade by Ariel, Maniki and the Black Halos. They're a Costa Rican band that I've talked about before. My first music album review on this channel was actually of an EP of theirs, Tear Garden. And they're a really good band. They're pretty popular as far as Latin American goth bands go, and goth bands in general, I'd say, the more modern goth bands anyways. And I'd probably talk about them more, but I don't want to seem like a Central American supremacist, and I don't want to just share the same bands over and over again. I've seen them compared to Sisters of Mercy, because as far as genres go, they're kind of somewhere between dark wave and gothic rock, which I guess is sort of Sisters of Mercy-esque, and also because it has a deep-voiced lead male singer, although that's a lot of goth bands. Anyways, I do understand the comparison. This particular album, Jade, I thought it was really good. Previously, my favorite album by theirs was Ritual, but I think this may have surpassed that one because I think that this one's a little more consistent. And it's also comparable to Tear Garden, even though that was a 5 or 6 song EP, because it sticks with the theme of Costa Rican indigenous mythologies, which I think is really cool because, first of all, it appeals to me as someone who was educated in the US, and here when we're in, 6th grade or 10th grade, depending on what history class you take, the indigenous people of Latin America that you learn about the Aztecs and the Mayans and then the Incans. You don't really learn about anyone in Costa Rica. So for me, this is all new information. And even if it wasn't new information, it'd still be cool because as far as rock music goes, most of the mythological stuff that we hear referenced is just Nordic and Celtic. And it's nice to see other stuff get referenced too. And I just like mythological stuff from anywhere. I like folkloric stuff, I should say. So that appeals to me anyways. And like I said, I like the sound, which I can't play a clip, but imagine, it's got keyboards, it's got rock and roll guitars. It's sort of like Sisters of Mercy, but not quite. Listen to it. Next is Ausencia by Lust Era, which is a 6-song EP pretty much, and one of the songs is a previously released song that is remixed. They are from Puerto Rico originally, though I believe they are currently based in Miami, Florida, here in the United States. They are a very interesting and strange little band. I've also reviewed an album of theirs in the past, but all their albums, they're all sort of different. Some of them, I was initially surprised to hear that they were described as goth when I first heard their first album. It's it's post-punky and kind of dark, but I don't know. But then other stuff, it is more obvious, because they do sort of stick with a dissonant post-punk sound throughout their career, I guess, but they vary up their sounds a lot, which I like. I like that a lot. And honestly, the most comparable band that I can think of is actually the Butthole Surfers, which is not a goth band, and maybe sort of an unusual band to compare anyone to because they were so strange. But seriously, these guys have a piece, not a song because it isn't sung, called Slow Fat Jesus on this album. And they're just very interesting. Like I said, they have that dissonant post-punk, but sometimes they're also very synthy. They've described themselves as synth rock, which we've talked about the synth punk genre before, which is basically what people call new wave that's made nowadays, because new wave isn't new anymore, but synth rock, it's like, yeah, this is definitely more on the rocking alternative, but still very synthy sound, and I like that personally. Listen to them. Once again, go below, click the link. Okay, next. Very important. I mean, these are all important, but this is important to this channel specifically for reasons you will discover, is Ukupacha by La Reina de los Condenados, which for those of you who don't know means Queen of the Damned. And yay, reference. They're an all-woman Peruvian goth band, and they've described themselves in all sorts of ways. They've called themselves ancestral rock and vampiric rock. And the reason that they are specifically here, so before I made this channel, I was kind of thinking of making a goth music channel because I like goth music. But I didn't want to do something that was what everybody talked about, because I'm so special, I need to be different, right? Anyways, and I was thinking it's like I did want to incorporate my Latino-ness because the Latino goth community is kind of my community, even though it's in the U.S., obviously not in, and specifically the part of the U.S. I live, not in Latin America. And I was discovering some more international goth bands and some from Latin America specifically, but I saw the music video to El Rincón de los Muertos, and I was instantly hooked. It has a siku in it, which for those of you who don't know, it's that instrument that all the Andean flute bands at the farmer's market have, that's like a bunch of little wooden pipes next to each other. That's a indigenous Peruvian thing, or it might not just be Peruvian, it might be a few different places in South America. And that was so cool to me. That's the only song I think they do that, or no, they do it in 2 songs, but dang, it was just, and that video is so interesting. I mean, that particular song, which is the opening song on this album, this 6-song album, it doesn't, the lyrics don't start until 3 minutes in very traditional goth fashion, but the dramatic music lead up was just, so cool. And the imagery, I encourage you to watch that video. It hooked me right away, and that's when I was like, I'm going to do something about Latin American goth music specifically after I saw that album, because I discovered Mekro Kiev and Ariel Maniki at that point, but then and Lust Era too, actually, but when I discovered this album, I was like, this is what I'm going to do. This album actually wasn't out yet. It was still 2018, and they hadn't put together their album completely yet, but now they have. And they are, I like them a lot. They do have, for those of you who don't know, Ukupacha, that's not a Spanish word, that is an Incan word. It's, I guess, the Incan underworld. So we have another album on here that has to do with, that's connected to indigenous Latin American mythology, but this time from Peru, not from Costa Rica. So as you can tell, I love my indigigoths around here. And now, not everything on this album is specifically about Peruvian, indigenous mythology, but it does stick to the general theme of underworld. And they're very thematically sort of the more theatrical types of goths, I guess, because they do talk a lot about death and spooky things, and they have a song that's literally called Necrophilia. And I'm probably the only person in the world who thinks that's cool. No, I'm not the only person in the world who thinks that's cool, because they have other people who like that song. And for any children watching this video, don't look that up, please. you don't want to know, or use like a solid dictionary, not a computer dictionary, you know. And they also have a cover of Romeo's Distress by Christian Death, but it's in Spanish, not in English. But it's still, in my opinion, it's a pretty cool song, and they also have a music video for that. And, something that I'm not going to discuss too much at length in this video, I'll tell you where I might discuss it more at length, is that, so a lot of times in the US, goths are very against the perception of us associating us with, like, Satanism or with blasphemous stuff. Because, I don't know, a lot of alternative people in the U.S. have become very respectability politics-y, and I have my feelings about that. Like I said, we're not going to discuss social issues, but it seems like a lot of Latin American goth bands, especially the more indie-goth ones, are very embracing of the sort of blasphemous and specifically anti-Catholic, not generally anti-Christian imagery and references, which I think you could probably figure out the more cultural implications as to why that would be, why they'd have an issue with Catholicism, and why people who are drawn to an alternative subculture might have an issue with something that is sort of overtaken the mainstream culture. And that's all I'm going to say about that there. And sound-wise, I don't know how to describe them, because they are sort of somewhere between death rock and post-punk, I guess. They're definitely not a darkwave band. I'm sure there is some keyboards or synths in here because it's a modern band, but it's not the overlying theme. It's more guitar and bass-based. I love me a good bass. And even the songs that don't have the traditional indigenous sounds, it just sounds very sort of real, I guess. Once again, listen to it if you don't think I'm describing it well. Somewhere between death rock and post-punk, but just always feeling very creepy and awesome. And spoiler alert, this album is actually going to be the first one I discuss when I do my podcast, and I do plan on getting a little more in depth about those sociological things, because I feel safer talking about those things on a podcast than doing it on YouTube. And just because, like I said, because of the importance of this album to this channel, I think it would be a good way to start off the podcast. Anyways, next album is As the Young Die by Last Dusk, who are also, like Ariel and Maniki and the Black Halos, from Costa Rica. So I'm not doing a lot for disproving that I'm a Central American supremacist, am I? But I don't know. I wish there was a Salvadoran goth band I could include on this list, but unfortunately I don't know of any. If you do, tell me. And what's fun is that Ariel Maniki actually helped on this album. He's not an official member, but he did help. And there's a lot of just little cameos by other Costa Rican goth artists. I guess all Costa Rican goths know each other. I previously did a video on this channel about Costa Rican goth bands, and I guess they all know each other. Because another person who has a cameo on this album is Eva Red of Red Apple Cult. And their album this year, I liked it. It didn't make it to this list because ethereal goth isn't really my thing, but that was also good. Anyways, this album specifically, it's pretty cool. It sort of has a rainy sound to it, but goth rock, like rainy goth rock, sort of dissonant, but not it reminds me of Ministry from a certain era. Just look at the album cover and imagine that in sound form, I guess, is how I could describe it. I guess most of you probably aren't as synesthesic as I, so you don't know how to picture that. But basically, it's sort of it's goth rock, but it's not as hard rocking or catchy as Ariel Maniki, though his influence from his involvement is definitely apparent. And fun fact, they're apparently a pretty famous band because they appeared at some goth music fest in the UK this past year, so that's pretty cool in my opinion. Anyways, finally, last but not least is Hoffen with Blinded. Blinded by Hoffen. They're a Mexican band. I've seen them described as cold wave, but I have seen that term used to describe so many different sounding bands that I no longer know what that means. I thought I knew what that genre was, but now I feel like I don't. And also, this is a very eclectic album, so I don't think I could use a single genre to describe them anyways. Like, they have sounds from sort of a traditional post-punk sound to some of the songs are sort of synth-poppy to a point where it's barely goth anymore. And then even one of the songs has almost a 2000 pop-punk emo feel, just with the guitars. It still has the goth vocals. So it's all over the place with the dark alternative influences. Yeah, like I said, sometimes they sound more post-punk, and sometimes they sound more dark wave. And I think that's what I liked about this particular album, is that it's so eclectic, and some of the songs sound like they could be totally different bands, but in a good way, not in a what are you doing kind of way. So anyways, that was my list. I hope you liked it, and down below I'm gonna leave links so that you can listen to all these bands, because I want you to support them because I liked them. And also, I'm going to have all of my social media links that you can listen to me at or follow me, because something I do is basically daily. I try to do it daily. I share different songs from goth Latin American artists, and I try to include as many countries, as many bands, as many eras, as many subgenres as possible. But it's not always possible, but I try to be as representative as possible. Obviously, there's more Mexico and Brazil than Uruguay. But, I try to balance it out. And, and then also my Instagram, I try to share the song of a day as much as possible in my stories, even though the photos are pretty much just, oh, look at this silly thing I saw. Isn't that fun? And also, a little update. Those of you who heard me mentioning my potential podcast, there's a few things that I'm going to try to do before I start it. For example, I need someone to draw me a logo, because the people I'm going to be doing my podcast through, you're required to have an original logo, I guess. And I can't draw that well, be it by hand or digitally, and I have some ideas of what I want it to be, but I don't know, and I don't trust any of the people that I do know well enough to do it. So yeah, if you know someone, preferably someone who's also Latino, whether from Latin America or from the US, or I don't know, from Canada, I don't care, but of Latin American heritage, and someone who is an artist, send me an email. Don't send me a comment or a DM. I'm terrible at responding to those. I'm going to have my business email included in the links below, and also preferably, if I can, in the credits. So yeah, and also, keep in mind, I don't have a lot of money, so preferably someone who's not too expensive, because obviously I would like to pay them if they're making me a little drawing thing, but I don't have a lot of money. I have more money than I did when I started this channel, thank goodness, now that I have a stable job situation, but still, it's not a lot. And also, I don't know, I'm just trying to figure out a schedule to both actually put things out, and also because I want them to be long enough to be interesting. And I'd like to have guests too from time to time, because single person podcasts can get kind of weird if it's not a story time podcast. And I don't know when that'll officially start. Hopefully sooner than later, but we'll see. And I'll update you on my other social media accounts that I previously mentioned. Anyways, that's everything for now. Bye.